Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, his church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. All right, joining me on today's episode is Shane Robinson, who is the full-time preaching minister at the Central Church of Christ in Dalton, Georgia. Shane has been married for 20 years and has been doing ministry for the last 17. He and his wife have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, and y'all's nephew is also living with you guys at this time. Shane enjoys time with his family, camping, hiking, kayaking. Shane, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
How old are your kids?
19 is my oldest son, 14 my oldest daughter, 12 daughter, and then 9 son.
Okay, so from 9
years.
9 to 19.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And your son is in college right now, right?
He is a freshman at Dalton State.
Yeah. What's he studying?
He is studying early childhood education.
Okay. So wants to be a teacher?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And you're also in school.
Right. I am he's actually my son. Funny thing, he took credits in high school. So we're about the same level of schooling together, and we have 2 classes scheduled in the spring of 2025 together.
I did not know that. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because whenever I was in my early 20s or late teens, I didn't want to hang out with my parents, and so I think it's kind of interesting that he is willing to take some classes with me.
You know, there's so much opportunity there for mischief and embarrassment for him, in the same class. I'm just thinking of all the things if I was, a dad and had my son in the same college class that I was in, that would not be a good thing.
Yeah, because once you reach a certain age, you're not going to get embarrassed, but you can
That's
do
right.
a lot of embarrassing.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So I wonder if there's going to be any like, hey, Dad, did you take notes today? Can I borrow your notes? I mean, is that going to happen?
Yes.
But not the other way around. You're not
No.
going to go to him and be like, hey, son.
There'll probably be some threatening to kick out of group projects if he's not holding his weight.
I wondered. I'm going to have to circle back with you on that because I'm super interested in when your professor discovers that you guys are father son. I mean, if I was the professor, I would definitely want to call that out to the class because that's kind of cool.
Yes, his class this semester, he had a math class and I had a science class that were across from the hall from each other. So I did walk in on his class and embarrass him a couple times. Yeah, we'll see how it rolls.
Son, did you do your laundry this morning? Your underwear is all over the place.
Yeah, hey, that might happen.
All right. So you are 20 years married, and you are a full-time minister, and I'm wondering, do you actually have time for your hobbies? You said you enjoyed camping and hiking and kayaking, some outdoor stuff. Is that, do you have time to do any of that stuff?
I have found that I have to make time.
Yeah.
I have to make time for different activities. So right now in this season of life, I'm looking for 2025 and spring break, and whether or not my younger kids and their spring break is going to coincide with my oldest son and my spring break, so that we can take time away. So that would be like camping or some kind of time. Something else that I also do is I Sabbath as a principle.
Yeah.
And simply by that is I try to take off Friday afternoon and until Saturday night. Mm-hmm. I try to just spend time with family, spend time just relaxing and not doing much. So as a principal, I force myself at least once a week to stop.
How long have you been doing that?
I read John Mark Comer's book on the ruthless elimination of hurry a few years ago, so probably 2021, I guess, 2020. I had studied with some people who were not Seventh-day Adventists, but I don't know exactly what they are, but they had introduced me to some Sabbath principles, and I was like, I don't know about that. And then fast forward a couple of years, I read the book, and I was just like, this actually kind of makes sense that God commanded his people to stop. And there have been times in my life where physically, mentally, that God, I believe, has stopped me because I was trying to do too much. And so now every week, I look forward to a time that I can just stop and hang out.
So I was having this conversation. It's ironic that you just brought this up. Yesterday, the day before, was talking about this very thing and why the churches of Christ, just and I know there's a broad, maybe a lot of people do practice, taking a day off during the week or somewhere to like practice more of a the Sabbath kind of thing. We don't do that. Generally speaking, I at least I don't know a lot of people that do it. I mean, we just stay busy all the time. I do, and I'm just wondering what gains, because I can imagine a lot of them, but it's like, how do I fit that in? I know that this is my mindset, just thinking I don't have time to do that, but you've been doing that now. How, do you see benefits? Is there something there that the rest of us are missing?
Well, I guess the benefits that I see, like Sunday's a big day.
Yeah.
So if I don't get any kind of rest in the 24 hours before that, give or take, it's going to wear me out.
Yeah.
And so on Sunday, I won't be in the shape that I should be mentally to do it. But I guess it's just something that I get to look forward to. Like I said, it's just a principle. It's not a religious practice.
Right.
So whenever you get to that next level, that I know there's a lot more details to it than people do. But like Comer in his book, he's done it in a few different books. As a matter of fact, the Live No Lies, Practicing the Way, and that was his newest one, Ruthless Elimination Hurry.
Yeah. Just
some of the things that he said in there that I thought were helpful. Like God had to tell his people to stop.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that one of the reasons that we're not focused and making the best use of our time is because we don't stop. Sometimes, like during my day, if I have a lot of stuff going on, I'm wearing 4 different hats, a lot of different things going on with family or with work or with school.
Yeah.
Like a 20-minute nap does wonders.
Yeah.
To be able just to stop and to regroup and refresh and to get started once again.
It's one of the things that I've seen when I back when I was the campus minister, and we take a mission trip every year. And one of the takeaways by a lot of people was like, there's just a different vibe. They're not as rushed. They're not as hurried. They're not as stressed out. It's a simplicity. In the Dominican Republic, we've been there, numerous times. The whole town of Rio San Juan, from I think it's like 1 to 2 o'clock or 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, shuts down every day. You can't go buy anything, any of the shops or wherever. So they're doing like a siesta kind of thing, and that seems to translate into their whole overall outlook of life and non-hurried, and it translates into taking time to stop and talk to people and have an actual conversation, not just hey, how are you? Good. Okay, see you later, and just passing back and forth. It's just a much slower pace, and it's built into their culture to maybe not necessarily for a full 24 hours, but it's built in every day where they are just stopping and not hurried.
Mm-hmm. You have to prepare to stop. That's an important part, though. Yeah. I mean, it's not just like, all right, I'm done, I'm stopping. Like for me, Friday's a hustle.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of stuff that I'm trying to do to accomplish by the time that I'm done, so that I can be done with whatever comes my way for the next, period of time. It's not to say that I don't have, like, we do life groups on Saturday nights. Sometimes we have a Saturday morning, like prayer breakfast or something. Then there's different things that are going on.
Yeah.
But like for me, Monday through Friday is the purpose of working hard to rest hard.
Yeah. So interesting. I'm gonna have to make my wife listen to this podcast because she has me projects every Saturday. Pretty much, yeah. Every Saturday, I'm working on a project, and you've given me the courage to stand up and fight back, to revolt. I'm going to raise the flag, the Sabbath flag, and say I refuse to work on Saturday.
Yeah, tell me how that goes. We'll see how that goes.
Any husband listening, they're like, dude, no, not going to happen. So, I no, in all seriousness, though, I think that there's a lot of good wisdom in there. God set that pattern himself. He rested, and I I think we'd be a lot healthier and a lot more easygoing if we didn't try to schedule every single day that we have to be doing something.
Mm-hmm.
So, John Mark Comer, what's the name of that book again?
I think the best book on just the general topic of slowing down is The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Okay.
It really helped me because for the first 40 years of my life, I was in a hurry all the time.
Yeah.
And I didn't really, then like one of the things that he points out in the book was like Jesus realized his time was short, but he was never in a hurry.
Yeah.
And for me, like I'm a hurry up and wait kind of guy. Mm-hmm. So I'll go drive, over the speed limit to get somewhere 15 minutes early just to sit there.
Yeah.
And so for me, like there's a lot of times, a few months ago, for example, actually last year, my family and I went on a drive, a fall drive to see the colors, and we went to Buc-ee's in Calhoun. You ever been to Buc-ee's?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a whole hour.
It's an experience
yes.
too. Yeah.
And so we went there, and it was packed out. So for me, I go into dad protective mode.
Right.
And so I'm trying to watch my kids, especially my girls, and all these people in there. But like I rushed the whole thing.
Yeah.
And my wife afterwards, she's like, "Man, we drove the speed limit. We just took in all the fall colors. We get to Buc-ee's, and you go into like crazy dad mode and ruin it." And it's just like
yeah.
I need to slow down. And so there's a lot of times in my life that I've just been in a hurry for no reason.
Right.
And in Comer's book, and you can find this if you just type in on Google, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, Slowing, and there's a chapter in there you can find on PDF that it gives actually some practical things to slow down in life.
Okay.
And that was really helpful to me.
Yeah. If we think about it, we'll put a link in the bottom part of if you're watching this on YouTube, there at the bottom of the description, if we can remember, there may be a link down there. By the way, this is going to be, we're going to try to get this out. This is our Thanksgiving Day special. So we may release this a day early. So if you're listening to this on Thursday, we were good on our word. We did what we said we were going to do. All right, Shane, what drew you into ministry?
That's a good question. So I didn't become a Christian until I was 22. My 8th grade, 9th grade year, I started smoking pot, got in the wrong crowd. I dropped out of high school. I got into a lot of physical labor jobs and just really, I thought I was going to be a welder or a machinist. And my grandfather was a gospel preacher for a number of years. My parents, my dad grew up in the 70s, long hair and muscle cars. Mm-hmm. He didn't fit in to the culture of the church at that time, and so he was kind of the black sheep. So he didn't really have a relationship with the church whenever he met my mother, and he's my stepdad. I call him Dad. But anyways, his father was a gospel preacher, and they had an influence on me throughout my early childhood, but they passed away in late 1990s. So my grandmother in 98, my grandfather in 99. I obeyed the gospel in 2003. Okay. And so after that, there was a couple of events that took place. C.G. Griffith, the late C.G. Griffith, who was a preacher at several places around the North Georgia, Chattanooga area, he baptized me and my wife. And I guess about 2 or 3 months after I obeyed the gospel, he said, "Hey, Shane, the teen class teacher didn't show up today. I need you to go teach class." And so I was like, "Okay, what do I do?" He's like, "Well, just go in there with your Bible." And so that was like step one, that I taught the teenage class. And then about 6 months later, or maybe 3 months later, I got the opportunity to preach on a Sunday evening. And then I started to think about pursuing ministry. Okay. And as I think about it, I have a couple of events that took place. One was before I became a Christian. So in the early 2000s, I had a close friend, who was a couple of years older than me. I hadn't talked to him in a couple of years at this time, but he died of a drug overdose. And of the group of friends that were at his funeral, I was the only one that got up. They had this sort of, anybody wanted to say something about, your friend? Does anybody want to say anything? I was the only person that got up to speak. And so that was like public speaking. I never really had a fear of public speaking and getting up in front of a crowd. Yeah. But then once the opportunity came for me to do it in a religious context, I thought, well, this might be something I would want to do. And the second part to getting into ministry was a guy that I worked with. I worked at Bluebird, and he was I drove rivets and rub rails on the side of school buses, and he was my bucker. So he had a piece of metal that he would hold, and he was a Baptist, and he kept on telling me, well, if you're going to be in ministry, you got to be called. You got to be called. And I was just like, yeah, I don't even know what that means. Yeah. And I was like, and finally one day I said, what does it mean to be called? And he says, if you can't read your Bible without wanting to share it with anybody, you know, if you don't have that burning desire to share what you study with others, you're not called. And so for me, it was just like, well, you know, that makes sense. I might not use the same terminology, but I really want to share the Bible with others. And so that was sort of, I guess, my calling into wanting to pursue a career in preaching.
And so you've been doing that for 17 years?
Since 2007.
Okay.
So I'm not good at math.
Okay. Well, 2017 would be 10 years, and so 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, right at 17, 18 years. Yeah. So you were how old then when all that happened, going back?
22.
22 years old.
22.
Okay. Yeah, so pretty young. So I want to talk about something that doesn't get talked about a lot. I haven't had, I'm trying to think, I've only had a few preachers on the podcast, and I don't know that we've actually really delved in or talked about this particular topic. And, you know, some of my reticence to do that is because, you know, I've been a minister now, 10, 11, 12, 13 years now, full time. Had a whole nother career before ministry. So that's an interesting thing to hear you if you're called. You know, that whole topic is kind of cool to me to talk about. But anyway, irrelevant to the conversation. I haven't talked about this a lot just simply because I am in the position I am in now. And it seems kind of icky, kind of weird to talk about this because I am a minister. But the sacrifices that are required to be a minister and to do the job like you know that you ought to be doing it, right? So preachers out there, anybody that does preach is going to understand this very well, that the sacrifices that have to be made, not only for yourself, but also your family. That's a real thing. And I don't know that the typical churchgoer really understands what that looks like. And I think, I mean, you know, if I can just say this and put myself out there just as a way of maybe just having an appreciation for those church people who do listen to this podcast, to appreciate your minister, to appreciate your preacher, because you may be aware that, yeah, of course he sacrifices and stuff, but to the extent, I don't think many people are aware. I certainly wasn't. Totally, you know, took that, and I was a preacher's kid too, and so I mean, I saw the sacrifices, but to be in that actual role, to do it day in and day out, really didn't have any idea of the mental exhaustion, the turmoil, the suffering, the worry because of things that you hear that are told to you in confidence. So I just throwing all of this out there, like kind of laying the groundwork to get your input into that as a person who's been doing it now for longer than I have.
I think that preachers, and may not be just for preachers, a lot of people are yes people, and so they don't like telling people no. Yeah. And so we struggle with boundaries, and also struggle with priorities, and a lot of times we can sacrifice our ministry or our family to the altar of ministry. Yeah. And so our family will be taking the back seat to ministry. I think that from maybe just a standpoint of trying to get the visual of what preaching may be like, it's, you know, the joke is if preachers only work a couple hours a week, but, you know, the preaching is the easy part. Yeah. The people are the difficult part and the challenging part, because you want to be empathetic. You want to be relate to the people that you care about and that you minister to. And I think that sometimes it will be a challenge to be able to say no and not feel guilty. Right. And I think that sometimes you need to be there, and you'll have to make those kind of sacrifices. In my ministry, I've done it well. I am a planner. I'm a go-getter. And, you know, one of the reasons that, like, Friday, the conversation that we just had, one of the reasons that, like, stopping on Friday works for me is because I've worn myself out during the week. And you know, sometimes you can be on call 24/7. Right. and you got to be able to say no, and you got to be able to learn how to do that without feeling guilty.
Yeah.
I think another thing is in being in transition last year for about 6 months, I had a greater appreciation for church members, and to sort of see where everyday life does come into effect and does come into play, where they are volunteering their time and their efforts, and they're on top of what they're already doing. And so that's something, a greater appreciation that I had for that. I guess practically, here's something that happened to me a couple months ago. My youngest son is playing baseball, fall baseball. It's over now. He was on a losing team, and it was kid pitch 9 and 10, which is like the worst baseball age group, because it's either like people are getting hit by the pitch and crying, or they're just walking and not swinging the bat. But anyways, he had baseball games on Monday nights, and this was the same time. We didn't realize that going in, but it was the same time that I was trying to start up some college ministry activities. Okay. And so I missed about six of his baseball games. And so I had to make a choice on, am I going to be there for my kid's baseball game, or am I going to be here and try to start this college ministry? Yeah. Was it right or was it wrong? I don't know. I mean, there's no yes or no for it, and some would disagree. I may have disagreed with it looking back. Yeah. But it's just a decision that I had to make. It's like, church came over baseball games. Yeah. It was fall baseball game, and fall is usually a lot more laid back and not as aggressive.
Yeah. And you extrapolate that out over the course of, a decade for you, 2 decades of ministry, and then however much further lies ahead. That is hard. It's a hard. It's part of the sacrifice. I think this is just the position that ministers are put in a lot that other people don't maybe think about, because there is this overwhelming sense of obligation, right? I mean, because you're getting paid for one thing. It is your job to minister. It is your job to be there for families, in times of crisis, and you're seeing people at their worst and the burdens, all of the typical stuff that goes with that. On top of the fact that you do feel a sense, at least I do, of obligation. And so oftentimes what I think is the right decision on certain issues, like, yeah, I absolutely have to be there, comes at the expense of family. And, it's one of those weird occupations where your family is kind of in the thick of it as well, in a lot of different ways. And I can certainly appreciate that growing up as a preacher's kid. I saw that side of it and understood, man, I wonder why Dad's not gonna. And he did a really good job too of balancing. But I know he was stretched incredibly thin, because he was all the time there for. I'm trying to think of a vacation that we took as a family that didn't get interrupted or something like that. So it's that type of thing that other people may not realize. One of the other questions I wanted to ask you though is there's this perception that preachers are like not prone to the same kinds of temptations and struggles and issues that everybody else is. And, the tendency to put preachers up here on this pedestal, which is absolutely, I think, part of the problem, and ministers are looked at as, you got to be better than us, right? But we do struggle. We do, like everybody else, we have our own issues. So how does that get navigated for you?
That's actually something I've gotten in trouble with quite a lot over the years. In my first internship in North Carolina out of school, I went to a church in North Carolina, and I was given the example of a time that I was trying to become all things to all men. Mm-hmm. And the guy that I worked with at the time that I became a Christian, we were partners at the construction job that we'd worked for a couple of years, worked out of town a lot. When I became a Christian, I no longer drank beer with him, and a lot of our relationship had struggled. And so one night, instead of going and drinking beer with him, I went and got me a 6-pack of O'Doul's, a non-alcoholic beer. Mm-hmm. And I told that story of as an example of trying to become all things to all men. And man, I got in trouble. Mm-hmm. And there were some people that coming out of the woodwork saying, "Oh, you can't do that." And so for me, for the next, decade, I was very hesitant to say anything about my past or about my struggles. Yeah. But I found that it resonated with people And for example, I did a gospel meeting several years ago in South Georgia, and the title was on do-over. And I remember one of the greatest compliments I ever got from a lady was there, and she said, "Well, Shane, I've been coming to church for all my life, for decades, and you're the first person that I've ever heard that really cares for people and wants to help people." And I've always remembered that. And so for me, I would much rather be vulnerable and get people upset for not understanding, my motive and intention. If I'm going to do that, it's to try to help people.
Yeah.
I'm not proud of the things I've done in my past, but those things have been forgiven and changed from, and I'm hope to make people not make the same mistakes, where if they do, they realize that the grace is there for them. And so for me, it's a real struggle to not say too much, because you can.
Right.
But then to say too little, because then you're no longer relatable to your audience.
Yeah.
I've heard someone say one time that, there's a type of preacher that can preach on hell, and it's almost like he's happy that people are going there. And there's a person that can preach on hell and be sad and miserable. And I want to be the latter. I want to be the person that, look, I don't want anybody to go there.
Yeah.
And that we're all on this journey together to not go there, kind of thing. And so for me, I've always felt if I'm going to try to balance this thing, and I'm going to lean in the direction of unintentionally offending people who are comfortable in the pew, and to try to reach the person who is struggling, because there's pain in every pew.
Right.
And there really is. I mean, there are people who are hurting. Yeah. Every time that we assemble as a church, there is someone with some kind of struggle. Yeah. And so if I can, in some small way, try to open up that door, I'm going to try to be a minister who can relate to people in their struggles.
Related to that, part of this conversation is because if you are a relatable person, people see you as an individual who they can go to and share their burdens with, share their struggles with, which oftentimes, the role that ministers play, that's part of it. I mean, the word itself is minister. It means, to give, to help, to, be an aid to. So we see for many preachers, for many ministers, we see the worst issues that people are struggling with. We see the things that, are just ripping their souls apart, and just the pain and the turmoil and the agony. And so they come to us, and it's things that cannot be shared with anybody else, because we are told these things in the strictest of confidence. And so you're dealing with that, and you know all of these struggles that people have, and you're trying to walk beside them and help them through, and be a good a good source for them and helping. So all of that kind of, after a while, man, those burdens pile up. I mean, it's a lot to carry, right? And I don't think there's a lot of people understand just how tremendous that weight can be for preachers, that they're carrying all that around. Where do they go to? That's the thing. And I see a lot of ministers who are just burdened with all of the stuff the baggage that they have to carry, but oftentimes they themselves don't have an outlet with their own stuff, because again, we have issues too, right? I mean, we struggle with our own stuff. And so it's almost like a catch-22. It's like, well, if I can't go and talk about this stuff because I'm, held to this higher expectation. I shouldn't have these issues, but I do. And, on top of that, I've got all of this other stuff from everybody else that I'm trying to carry. So what do we say to that kind of situation? What's the thought process there?
This may go back to the previous discussion that we just covered about relating to ministry and the problems. Mm-hmm. And so we all have problems and families, and so if you were to be an EMS worker, you can go do a very difficult job,
right?
But then you can come home and maybe talk to your spouse or maybe something, and next day. But church ministry, you're dealing with all kinds of problems, and you don't want to bring those problems home, mm-hmm. because that's your family,
right?
Essentially. And so there are struggles. Here are some red flags and or places to avoid in what I would say if I was sitting down to a preacher to say, you need to have an outlet. Okay, substances, no, it's not going to help. It's actually going to make it worse.
Right, sure.
Your spouse, you want to be able to have a conversation with your spouse, but you also want to be able to be an encourager to your spouse.
Right.
And women, in my experience, can handle things a lot more emotionally than men. And so, whereas to illustrate, we can sort of take it in stride, and it may not be, and then we just get it off our chest. Well, if I were to tell my wife something like that, she may hold on to it a lot longer, and I would bring on stress for her. Another member of the church, that would not necessarily be the best. Now, if you would have an eldership at your congregation that you could help and that you had that kind of relationship, that might be a way to do it, but it's still not ideal because it's in-house kind of thing. And so for me, I think that the way that I would point people to would be to a friend outside of ministry, outside of the church that you're with, whether it be another preacher or someone that you know. For me personally, I go to a licensed therapist, and there's no shame in that. And I have been open about that, and I don't have any apologies. I've been on various medications over the years. I'm currently not on any medication, but there have been seasons in my life whenever it's just been overwhelming, and I need a little bit of something to help with my anxiety and dark, thoughts. But for me, a licensed therapist that I can talk to, preferably someone from a Christian worldview.
Right.
Now that's a very broad term. For me, I like talking to guys, and so I have had a female therapist before, and she did an outstanding job. But currently, the guy that I talk to, and at this point, it's like once every couple months, I might talk and go in, and he's the one that actually encouraged me to go and pursue a counseling degree. And so, just different things to help in different seasons of life, and just to be able to I guess, vent in a safe space. Right. That's what I would say. I mean, to answer your question, who do we go to? Someone that you can vent to in a safe space. Not somebody that's necessarily going to answer your questions, but someone that's just going to allow you to get stuff off your chest. Yeah. And because sometimes, there's some pretty crazy and far out there ideas or things that I have to say, and if I can say that to somebody and not say it to a congregation, it's going to help me. Yeah. So resting is one way that I've been able to do that, or to look forward to a time off each week, but also to have those outlets that I can speak with, because friends are hard. Right. It really is. And whenever I entered into ministry and I came to the Chattanooga area, 2007, I wanted to get in with certain groups, and I found out, like, as long as you toe the party line, you're good. But as soon as you don't toe the party line, you're out. Yeah. And so for me, on the other side, it's just like, well, I don't want to be a part of that. And so I've sort of felt out of place for a number of years here in the area for, people. But there's still a sense in which I have some people around the area that I can go to in times of need or something like that to talk to in confidence. I know have my best interest in mind. This is something I would tell to a church member. Yeah. Get you a friend that's going to tell you, that's going to listen to you with compassion, but is also going to be willing to tell you the things that not that you want to hear, but the things that you need to hear to make you a better person. Yeah.
I guess, the takeaway on this, this whole conversation is centered around the fact that your preacher, for those listening, you go and you listen to your preacher, and he seems like this guy who's got his act together, everything's going good. I don't know anybody, any preacher, any minister that does not have their own struggles and their own issues. And unfortunately, we live in a world where there's such stigma placed on your preacher having faults and issues. He's seeing somebody. Are you kidding me? I didn't. So there's that stigma on it, and there shouldn't be, because we're like everybody else. And the fact that we have family struggles, we have issues, worries about our kids, just everything that everybody else struggles with, right? We have the same struggles, so it's okay for everybody else to have those issues because that's expected. But if you or I have those same issues, we're like, wait, what? Are you kidding me? He's our preacher.
Yeah, and we got to change that. Yeah, because I think that there was an unintentional arrogance to preaching for now. I think some of the things are shifting now. But if you look at preaching 40, 50 years ago.
They brought it on themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the pronouns that were used within teaching was all about those people out there who, believe this or who are doing this. But you don't realize that those people are in your congregation.
Right.
You're speaking to them directly.
Right.
And I think that one of the ways that we can help this as preachers is to use we pronouns.
Yeah.
I pronouns. Yeah. I struggle with this. Maybe you do as well.
Yeah.
And those are things that will help to move it forward in the right direction.
Yeah. That's ever since I've been preaching, a lot of this stuff, people come up and say, that this whole month's topic really resonates with me. I needed to hear this. How'd you come up with this idea? I'm like, because I struggle with it. I'm preaching what I need to hear. I'm concerned about it myself because this is my issue, and so I wanted to research it. And I thought, you know what, this is helpful for me. Maybe it's going to be helpful for you too. So, I absolutely. 'Cause I don't want to be on that pedestal. I mean, that terrifies me. Mm-hmm. People get knocked off their pedestals all the time, and it hurts when you hit the ground.
One of the things that I've found, if I speak on a difficult subject, I'm going to face that.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like Romans 2, where it says, you tell people not to do these things, but you practice the same things. And so for my life, whenever I preach on some kind of, attitude adjustment or some kind of behavioral issue, it's very likely that I'm going to struggle with that in some way, maybe in principle, that very week. And so sometimes I'll remind them, look, I'm preaching to myself here as well. I know that this is something that I'll struggle with.
Yeah, good stuff. What's your biggest concern for the church today?
Well, my relationship with the church has primarily been in the Chattanooga, North Georgia area. Mm-hmm. So I can't really think outside of that scope. As I think about the concerns for the church in this particular area, I've seen decline in the last decade. Mm-hmm. Now, I anticipate a rapid decline in the next 10 years. In particular with some congregations that are aging, that don't have any youth, and are basically on life support, and have been for some time. But they may have money in the bank or something like that to pay the bills and don't really know what to do. I mean, I think that there still is hope that things may change and turn around, but it's really without having a young vibrance to a congregation, it's really tough to get back started. So I guess my concern over the next 10 years or so within the church is a transition. I don't necessarily see a lot of transitioning with vision and foresight within the local congregations that are functioning and are healthy. Mm-hmm. Mentorship, next generation, training, those kind of things. Yeah. But also churches that can see the writing on the walls, but they're not doing anything about it to help the next generation, and maybe to use those resources for further opportunities. So for example, there's two churches that I think of. I've only heard about them. I read about them in books and talked to people who were once a part of those ministries. One of them is the Eastdale congregation. You ever heard of Eastdale?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know what you know about it, but it was a thriving congregation in the late 70s, early 80s. Mm-hmm. And then within a short period of time, I mean, it's gone. It's a funeral home now. Yeah. The building is. Yeah. But I think about some of those churches that were really booming, and then, they no longer exist. What happened? What happened to that church? Mm-hmm. And when did things start to decline? And so for me, in that particular issue, I think part of it was the demographics of the area changed. Mm-hmm. And to relate that to churches today, I think that churches really need to consider the demographics of the community that they are in. Yeah. And so if it is a lower income area that is Hispanic or African American or other minority groups, mm-hmm. and the church is made up of middle-class white families, mm-hmm. That's, for me, just looking at that from the outside in, no racial meaning whatsoever, but it's just like you you don't fit in
Right.
the community that you're
Right.
in. And so what are some things that you could do to put some resources in it to try to keep this thing going, to reach the people that God has called for us to reach?
Yeah.
And so I think that some of those are concerns for me.
Yeah. I think I didn't know what your answer was going to be. But that is a recurring thing that I'm hearing more and more. Research is coming out. I think the last update, I'm sitting in on a Wednesday night class where we're talking about this very thing. And the last stats that we have is pre-COVID, it's 2018. And the picture there is really alarming as far as the decline and churches shutting down and church membership has gone from, at its peak, which was I think sometime in the mid 80s, where we were counted in the millions. Now it's hundreds of thousands. I mean, so the decline has been steady, and it's also been increasing as far as the number. We don't know yet. I think the statistics are coming out. The last survey that's been done after 2018. So I think 2025 is going to be the next update, and we're going to see what these last few years have looked like. And I'm afraid that the picture is going to be more dire than what we realize. I'm not trying to be a pessimist here, but I do believe that there's a lot of church leaders that are going to be in for a rude awakening. And I think that a lot of church leaders kind of see the writing on their wall, but they're just not taking steps to change, to do something to address the issue. And so I'm wondering, what does that look like? I mean, are you a millennial?
Yes.
Okay.
My wife says I'm not. She was born in 80. I was born in 81.
Okay.
So I believe I'm a pioneer millennial.
Yeah, you're at the very cusp of that. So I'm Generation X, and that decline really began, like really steady decline with Generation X. So there's stuff going on there, and then millennials, we've seen a big drop off there, and then what was the one after that? Generation Z. I can't remember that. And then now we're at Alpha. So we see this trending downward, and it's getting worse and worse. We're not reaching the younger generation. Church is not resonating with the younger generation. And, I think there's a lot of opinions out there. Every person's got their own opinion, but I think that there are some themes that keep recurring. And one that I hear over and over again is they just don't feel connected as far as relationships. They don't feel like a genuine, it's inauthentic. They're looking for authentic experiences. And I don't know how many church leaders are sitting down and having those conversations about how do we change that dynamic here? How do we get out of the 1950s programming where, church looked like you come in Sunday morning, Sunday night, and for those that had Wednesday night service, you've put in your time. You're done. You're free. You're free to go. You've been released. And there's no interaction during the week. Nothing's taken place. So there's no connection there with your church family. That's not resonating with today's youth. They want something more than that.
Yeah, you look at the statistics, and around the 1980s is when the decline started. Amongst whatever brand, whatever group, it was all
it's not
all churches,
not selective. It's
yes, and I can't help but to think about what contributed to that. I think that maybe there was a lot of legalistic, very much, I got this thing figured out. You're wrong, I'm right kind of mentality within churches. Yeah. And that, one of the things that I look back on with some of the I guess boomers and then the silent generation, I've ministered to them, and there's still some of those that are left, and a lot to listen to and learn from. But I've thought about, a lot of times their kids aren't faithful. Yeah. They're not any part of it. And I wonder why, because sometimes people look back at that as the heyday of the church. And there were a lot of things that were going. I mean, the church really was evangelistically minded and wanting to reach out to people. They had that going for them, but the culture was very caustic. It was very harsh. It was it wasn't loving. It wasn't any of the fruits of the Spirit, really. Yeah. And so I think that really turned people away. Yeah. And I think that in recent times, politics have really, in social media, have really turned away some of the younger generations to say, well, if this is what Christians do, is just fight and argue and just make fun of people, I don't want any part of that.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them.
Yeah.
And so I think that there has to be a mind shift, a shift of the way that we're thinking about people, and to try to see people come along in the right way. So I don't really know what the answer is. Yeah. I don't really know what the answer is within it. I do know that it has to be more than a Sunday morning gathering, yeah, or a Wednesday night gathering. Yeah. And I in transition last year or year before last, I'd visit churches that were smaller and didn't have any youth, and they would worship, and they were there faithfully Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday night, but that was it. Yeah. I mean, and that was the gist of their existence, was to simply sit there, worship, sing the same songs, say the same prayers, and repeat. Yeah. And there has to be more to it, and to reach the next generation, because when you think about it, I have a guy that we're trying to get to come hang out. He's from Mexico, and he works in Dalton. Has a large Hispanic population where I'm at, and a lot of the people who live in Dalton are second and third generation. So they've grown up here, and they know. But this guy, his mom was walking down the road and just so happened to come to our church building. She went back to Mexico a couple weeks ago until her visa can be renewed. But we got connected with him, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing Thanksgiving?" He's like, "Oh, well, I got to work." I was like, "Well, would you be interested in coming to our house after you get off work?" He said, "Oh, really?" He said, "That'd be my first Thanksgiving." And so I just bring that out to say that hospitality and those things, there are people who have never been into someone's home. Yeah. I mean, they may have been out to eat at a restaurant with someone, but there has to be something more intimate and genuine about the relationships that we have. Yeah, absolutely. You and I had talked a little bit before the podcast. We were talking about small groups, and that being, I believe, not the answer, but part of the solution for the sustainability and growth, and not just surviving but thriving of tomorrow's church. Hopefully is being implemented today. I certainly have harped on this here at this congregation, just how important small groups are. The biblical example we have of small groups, it is not a radical thing. It is going back. I mean, if you call going back to our roots, to what the pattern that Jesus had, okay, we can call that radical, I guess, but it's what worked in the first century. It's what has worked at the Student Center, and I believe that it is one of the things that is going to be absolutely necessary for the survivability of the church. To turn this tide, there's got to be stuff going on through the week where we're connecting with our church family more than just coming in on a Sunday morning, because it's a lot more likely and less intimidating, I'll add, to ask a person who maybe you work with, somebody that's unchurched, somebody who is not familiar, with the Bible and the good news, the gospel, to ask them into your home, that hospitality piece of it, to be part of a small group, develop that relationship, and then, they're going to know, who knows, 10, 15, 20 people that are part of that small group, they're comfortable with it, and then they're invited to church to worship with you, and then, they're part of that membership. That's organic growth versus, hey, do you want to come to church with me? And they've never been there. They don't know anybody. I've been down that road, and it's, it's a no. It's a no. It's a no. It's a no. Nah, I got other stuff to do. But we start practicing it like Jesus practiced it and building those relationships. All of a sudden, we've got people that know that we're approaching them from the heart, that we're genuinely concerned, that we want to be their friends, that we want to have that relationship with them. And I think that's your generation on down, that's what they're searching for, is meaningful relationships. They don't want the fake stuff. And I'm sorry to say this, and it may offend some listening, but a lot of the older generations, those older churches, the relationships, maybe to them that's how they related, but you can't hold that standard to today, because that is not how people relate today. That is not what resonates. And so I think we need to start changing stuff.
in that regard. Not changing for change's sake, but changing because we need to go back to how Jesus said we should do things.
Yeah, it's not necessarily changing things; it is revisiting.
Revisiting, yeah, good.
Jesus had 120.
Yeah,
he had 12.
Yeah,
and he had 3.
Yeah,
there's a part for everybody.
Yeah.
In our fellowship, in our worship, that has its place. It has its procedures, but there are things that we cannot do in worship, not directly.
Right.
And so, can we really forgive someone?
Yeah.
Can we really bear one's burdens?
Yeah. Cry on each other's shoulders.
Yeah. Can we really fulfill those one another commands in Scripture? Well, no. I mean, you can maybe in small part, but not in a focused way.
Yeah.
And even in 12, there were the 12 that Jesus excluded others to be with the 12,
right?
And to have those conversations with them when they would say, "Hey, what's that parable meant?" Or why couldn't we do this? Well, that was a time for him to have that relationship building, and then even smaller, where you had
Peter, James, and John,
you had those connections that were a lot more deeper and a lot more connected. And so, whenever I try to think about this just in concept, you need those 3 people, you need those 12 people, you need those 120 people, and so there's wisdom to it. And I think about it, Larry Osborne's book, Sticky Church. He is the pioneer for the small group model in America, and he's the one that pioneered sermon-based small groups. And one of the things in his book that he talked about was he used a Lego as an example. And he says you can only have so many connections in life. And so I think that small groups allow us to have those connections and to really be able to do more than we would not be able to do otherwise.
Right.
So, for example, this Sunday, my wife wasn't feeling well. Her blood pressure was up, and she had some concerns. And so we didn't go to small group after service on Sunday. And we took her to the emergency room to get her checked out. And by the time I got home, there were like 4 or 5 people out of my small group that had sent me a message and say, "Hey, give us an update."
Yeah.
And that was because they realized we weren't there.
Right.
And so, you can't really, you can do that on a larger scale, but even then, my wife is very private.
Yeah.
If we were to have something, she wouldn't want the whole church to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Good point. Same with us. We have within our small group prayer request that just goes to our small group that is meaningful, because I know those people know me, we know them, and it's just real. And that's not taken away from the larger corporate body, but it's just impossible to have that type of meaningful relationship with 250, 300 people that you can have, again, Jesus' example, with the 12, and then even more so with the 3. Yeah, good stuff. All right, so I'm trying to, we're going to try to put this out. I can't not talk about this, and this was something I added to it. But I want to talk a little bit about, as we close out, gratitude, being grateful. Genuine gratitude makes the things we have, this is my opinion, genuine gratitude makes the things that we have more meaningful, and the things that we want far less important. And I'm thinking about this in terms of being grateful is like a decision that we make. Like we wake up each morning, we decide, I think we have to be intentional about it. We decide, I need to be thankful for today, in spite of the ups and the downs, in spite of, not having the things that I may want. I'm going to be grateful in spite of that, right? And so I'm thinking about our current society and I don't know, this may be too strong of a word, but like just this sense of entitlement, like the world owes me, I deserve to have this, and how that brings chaos to the meaning of what the gospel is all about. So as a minister who has been doing this now for 17 years, so long enough to see kind of where we've been at and like just the overall feeling of gratitude and thankfulness that people had that didn't have a lot, versus now we seem to have everything at our disposal, at our fingertips. And it's like, yeah, I deserve that. And where's the rest of my stuff while we're talking about it, right? What's the impact there that you've seen that have on society and specifically culture within the church?
Well, gratitude is something that I struggle with. It is something that I have struggled with for some time. And part of that is because I tend to focus on the past and on the future, and I fail to live in the present. Mm-hmm. And so in recent years, I have tried to not look over my shoulder to wish something should have been done or should not have been done. I don't try to look ahead too far to say, well, looking back, sometimes I'll say, well, we didn't have enough people, or I wish more people were there. And I just never focused on the present, on who I have there. Yeah. And sometimes I think about the future, about what will be, or what, all these different dreams and aspirations. And I fail to focus on the people that are around me. Right. I am 43. My mom died at 54 of cirrhosis. My grandmother died in her early 60s of lung cancer. My stepdad died in 2022 of COVID. So a lot of the people that are a major part of my life are no longer here. Yeah. And so my Thanksgiving this year will be surrounded by family. Mm-hmm. And, over the years, I'm the oldest of the children, mm-hmm. and everybody comes to our house. And so there's a lot of that, but one day I won't be here. Yeah. And so it's appreciating the little things in life. And so that's what I would encourage people to do, is to try to express gratitude, or realize it first by the things that you have, not what you don't have. Yeah. But then to try to express those feelings and those thoughts. I think about people in our congregation every week who it's a struggle. So there's one lady who's named Charlene Holloway. She lives in an assisted living home in Dalton, Georgia, and she's there every Sunday, but she don't drive. Yeah. Somebody has to come pick her up, and there's a handful of others. Yeah. She's widowed. She's in a wheelchair. There's a handful of other people who are there every week, and so for me, I think about that. I need to be expressing how thankful I am for just the people who feel insignificant, mm-hmm. who that their life doesn't have meaning, to try to encourage them in some small way. I think that's one way that we can do better. I know that personally in my ministry, whenever I feel down, or I get in my feelings and feel like, woe is me, the world is coming down. I call it Eeyore syndrome. Yeah. Oh, poor me. Yeah. All you got to do is go to a nursing home. Yeah. All you got to do is go to a hospital. All you got to do is go to some DFACS or some food bank. There's all kind of opportunities to see the struggles that people have to put life back into perspective. Another thing within this that you alluded to earlier was, something I struggle with as well, is having a victim mentality, mm-hmm. or a sense of entitlement. Yeah. Nobody owes me anything. Yeah. Life is hard. Get over it. Yeah. If it is something that you're struggling with, talk to somebody about it. Mm-hmm. But we can't just keep living in the past. I mean, for example, I mentioned earlier that I dropped out of high school. I blame my parents for that for a long time. Mm. I only like 4 I finished my senior year. I like 4 credits to graduating. And my parents, my stepdad, his partner lost his job, and he needed somebody. So he said, "Hey, you're not gonna go back to school. You might as well just come get a job with me." And so I did, and I never went back to school. And so for me, for a long time, I'd blame my parents for not encouraging me. Yeah. And then my mom died, then my dad died, and guess what? I don't have anybody else to blame. Yeah. And so for me, that's a wake-up call. Is like, man, why in the world would I want to blame someone else for my actions or inactions? And so that's a little bit of rambling there. But.
No, that's good stuff. And I think it goes, the whole, entitlement victim, part of my grad program, I had to go to AA meetings for an entire semester, every single week. So I got to sit in, and this is the stuff that they talk about in that the victimhood mentality is the very thing that brought them into that lifestyle to begin with, and that they'd had nobody to blame for themselves, that, they needed to look around and see all the the missed opportunities for appreciation, for gratitude that they had, and just completely changing the way that they looked at things. And trying to tie this back into kind of what we've been talking about, for me, and kind of like the aha moment was coupling that with settling into a place of gratitude for what Christ has done for us that had never truly and fully resonated until I stopped and I started to dwell on just what that actually means, the price that had been paid. And it's like, I can never have enough gratitude anymore. It's beyond my reach to say thank you enough and to be appreciative of enough of what has been done for me. And so any way that can be manifested by me towards other people, I mean, I think we're in the season to think about that, to do that. So yeah, this has been a good conversation, Shane. I appreciate everything that you've talked about. I want to close out the show now and do you have a favorite passage of Scripture that you want to share?
Yeah, you asked me to come up with a passage, and somebody asked me just recently what my favorite book of the Bible was. And I was, usually it's whatever you're studying at the time.
Yeah.
So but I mentioned Ruth was a favorite book of the Bible for me in the Old Testament. And part of that, matter of fact, had go back to a mutual friend, Jeffrey Brewer.
Oh, yeah.
And whenever I met him back in 2009, I guess it was, he had been listening to a podcast on Redeeming Ruth, and he told me about grace and things like that. And so I began to really think about how life God can be in our circumstances and stuff like that. But I guess a passage that comes to mind for me is 2 Timothy chapter 4, and it's verse 17 and 18. And it's at the end of that section of Scripture where Paul's like, all right, come to me. Demas has forsaken me. Bring the parchments, this, that, and the other. And he has this statement. He says, at my first defense, his first trial, no one stood with me, all forsook me. And I think about that passage in his time that he needed someone to be there for him, that he needed someone to have his back, that he needed someone to plead his case for him. He showed up to court and nobody else did. And they left him high and dry. As a matter of fact, the word forsook is a strong word. They abandoned him altogether.
Yeah.
But the next verse says, but the Lord stood with me and strengthened me. And for me, that's been a verse in my life that I've just said, even if I don't fit in, even if people don't understand me, even if I don't understand myself, in those times, just keep on keeping on. And the Lord's going to give you strength, and he's the one that's going to lift up your head. He's the one that's going to be there for you. So that's one of the verses that I try to think about in my life. If my intentions are pure, if my motives are right, even if someone doesn't understand what I'm saying and doing, the Lord does, and that's all that matters.
Yeah. Man, that's fantastic stuff. Men are always going to let us down. People are going to let us down, but God never will. He's going to be biased. Okay, so if you're done eating your turkey today, you've got a full belly, you don't want to watch the football game, listen to this podcast. Go ahead and click on play, and I think it's a good conversation to listen to.
Or if after you've had your turkey, that makes you sleepy.
Fall asleep while you listen to this podcast.
Yeah, you can do that too.
You've got that calming voice too, man. It's a good radio voice. Give us feedback. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe so you'll get updates anytime we put a new one, a new podcast out. Share it with other people that you think would benefit from hearing some of the things that we're talking about. And also consider becoming a sponsor of one of our episodes. We're definitely open to that. That doesn't necessarily have to be monetary stuff. If there's something there that you want to get out and have other people listen, maybe you've got your own podcast that is worthy of being listened to. It's got good content. Speaking of good contact, Ministry League is one of our sponsors, and you see their app there on your screen. If you want to download that to your phone, they've got over 100,000 downloads now and counting. They've got incredible resources for people. So consider being part of their program. We appreciate their sponsorship so much. Until our next podcast of The Lion, the Way, and the War, Love one another, be kind to one another. Remember, the creator of the universe loves you so much that he gave up his only son for you. Have a blessed day. Happy Thanksgiving.